Kind of the scarcity, right? Because we always want to be chasing those high variance seasons. Just a couple of years ago, we could find a Lamar Jackson in the double digit rounds, like Kyler Murray a couple of years ago. But those quarterbacks who profile as true fantasy team difference makers, they're just getting more scarce the later into the draft we find ourselves. And I agree that we're going to end up having to take a leap a little bit earlier in our drafts. Meanwhile, having an elite fantasy quarterback seems to be becoming more important. And that's where I kind of want to steer it, because it was a huge part of being a league winner this year in your fantasy league if you didn't have Alvin Kamara. What I mean is the quarterback pool to choose streamers from was smaller this year. 21 quarterbacks hit the 200 fantasy point mark this year. That's the lowest since 2014. 5 fewer quarterbacks on the radar, so to speak, than last season. So, JJ, do you think having an elite option at the quarterback position is becoming more of an advantage for fantasy owners in recent years, or is it heading in that direction?
Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at what happened, this season in particular, what we found was that, not only was rushing a bigger deal this season, if you look at top 12 quarterbacks and you split them by passing points per game and rushing points per game, both passing and rushing were up versus the last decade worth of seasons. But I think that if you look at the rushing points per game, that's going to be something that's a little bit stickier year over year than what we're going to see from passing. So, if you look at passing numbers this year, they were bonkers. They were absolutely nuts, which is why we saw, the numbers that you just spit out there. But the thing is that passing generally tends to regress. So if you look at like an Aaron Rodgers and what he did this year, is crazy high touchdown rate. Touchdown rate is generally a number that will regress heavily year over year. So, last season, Lamar Jackson, of course, he has his rushing floor, but you looked at his touchdown rate, you looked at what he did through the air. It's very obvious that regression was going to come. So that's the first thing, is that, instead of historically, we had these quarterbacks who would only run the ball and not really pass the ball that well. We now have these quarterbacks who are running the ball and passing the ball really well. And so you have this sort of like unicorn player that's popping up. And until we get, 12 quarterbacks that have that dual threat ability to a QB1 ceiling degree, then those quarterbacks are going to bring forth more scarcity and be give you an advantage week in and week out. One of the things that I think the best way to sort of like frame this is that if you look at the last decade worth of data, and you plot average draft position on the x-axis and then points scored on the y-axis. So what you're looking at is our preseason expectation versus our postseason result, right? And if you look at the graph, there's zero correlation at the quarterback position between QB1 to QB12 if you're looking at the top 12 quarterbacks, which tells you that the QB12 hypothetically would have just as good of a chance to finish with the most fantasy points as the QB1 would in terms of ADP, right? So what that tells you is that the market has been very inefficient over the last, 7, 8, 9 years. This year and entering this year, it was very evident. And I wrote about this too. So this isn't just me like, talking hindsight and stuff, but, entering this season, you had a very efficient market and it was pretty obvious. You had, Josh Allen and Dak Prescott and Russell Wilson and Kyler Murray. And then obviously the guys at the top and, Deshaun Watson, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson. You had all these guys who had this really high passing ceiling, but also had this really high rushing ceiling. And what that meant was there was going to be a higher chance that the correlation that I was talking about, ADP versus postseason result, was going to be a lot stronger than what we had seen, the previous 8 or 9 seasons. And what that means is that they're now becoming, quarterback is actually now becoming more predictable than it was before. Where, back in the day when I first wrote my ebook, people would tell me that they're drafting quarterbacks early because they want safe bets, but they've never been safe bets. But now you're actually getting that. You're actually getting, because going into next year, we're going to have a pretty good idea. There's going to be some guys that jump in, and that we don't expect, that jump into the top 7 or 8 quarterbacks or so that are really giving you an edge. But we're going to have a pretty good idea of which quarterbacks are going to be good because of the dual threat ability, because of what's sticky year over year, and that's the rushing ability. So to answer your question in a less long-winded way, the importance of having one of those quarterbacks is increasing. Now, how long is that going to last? I don't know. I think what needs to happen is we need this influx of talent and dual threat ability to come from college, which we are kind of getting this year, right? So if even 2 of those quarterbacks hit, then all of a sudden we're in a position where, yeah, we could probably wait because the QB 12 is going to be someone like, let's say Justin Fields hits or something. It's going to be someone like that we feel comfortable with. So there's no reason to, get a Dak Prescott in the 5th round or whatever. But yeah, I mean, overall, things are definitely changing, and the need to get one of those guys is a lot different than it was 2 or 3 years ago.